There's something I think a lot of people misunderstand about discipline. We usually assume the problem is ourselves, that we're too lazy, too distracted, too weak-willed. But the more I observe everyday life, the more I realize that maybe the problem isn't us at all. Maybe it's the environment we're living in. Think about it. Our phones are always right next to our beds. Social media is designed to make us keep scrolling forever. Fast food can appear at our door with just a few taps. Notifications constantly interrupt us. And every single day, our brains burn energy simply trying to resist hundreds of tiny temptations like these. What's interesting is that mental exhaustion doesn't always come from difficult work. Sometimes it comes from having to make too many small decisions. Should I work out today? Should I open TikTok just for 5 minutes? Should I keep working or take a break? Should I order food instead of cooking? Should I finally start the important task right now? And every time we make one of those decisions, we drain a little more of our mental energy. Psychology calls this decision fatigue, the mental exhaustion that comes from constantly having to make decisions. It means that before we even begin the truly important work of the day, our brains have already been worn down by dozens of meaningless choices. And this completely changed the way I think about discipline. Maybe the most disciplined people aren't the strongest ones. Maybe they're simply the people who designed their environment better. They don't rely on willpower to fight temptation every single day. They make good decisions become the easiest decisions. For example, if you want to exercise more instead of forcing yourself to feel motivated every morning, just place your workout shoes right next to the door. If you want to spend less time on your phone, stop sleeping next to it. Leave it in another room. If you want to focus deeply on work, stop placing yourself in environments full of notifications, noise, and constant distractions pulling your attention away. It sounds simple, but this is actually an incredibly powerful psychological hack. Because our brains will almost always choose the path of least resistance. If opening TikTok is easier than reading a book, you'll open TikTok. If lying down feels easier than exercising, you'll procrastinate. If your phone is right beside you, you'll pick it up almost unconsciously. So instead of trying to become someone with unstoppable willpower, maybe we should start by removing unnecessary temptations from our environment in the first place. I once read an idea that really stayed with me. Willpower shouldn't be wasted on small decisions. Because willpower is a limited resource. If you spend all day fighting your phone, resisting junk food, or battling procrastination, then by the time you actually need to focus on something important, your brain is already running on empty. And that's when I started changing a few very small things in my life. I deleted infinite scroll apps from my phone, turned off almost all notifications, stopped sleeping next to my phone, placed books somewhere easier to see, and kept my laptop in one specific corner meant only for work. And strangely enough, I no longer felt like I had to force myself as much as before. Things started to feel more natural. I think this is something a lot of productivity advice completely misses. Most people keep telling us to try harder, be more disciplined, work harder. But very few people talk about the fact that our modern environment is already designed to make distraction unbelievably easy. And if that's true, then constantly blaming ourselves probably isn't completely fair either. Look at how social media actually works. Algorithms understand what we like. They know when we're most likely to feel bored. They know exactly what kind of content keeps us scrolling the longest. The entire system is optimized to capture as much of our attention as possible. And then we blame ourselves for being too weak to resist it. But honestly, that's like trying to stay on a diet while sitting in a room full of junk food. Willpower alone can rarely defeat an environment that constantly pulls you in the opposite direction. That's why I've started believing that designing your environment matters far more than trying to become a perfect person. A good environment makes good actions feel almost automatic. For example, I realized there are certain places where focusing becomes incredibly easy for me. There are cafes where the moment I sit down, I instantly feel like working. And there are other places where I can barely think clearly at all. At first, I thought it was just my mood. But over time, I realized that space deeply affects our mental state. The lighting, The sounds, the smell, how clean or cluttered the room feels. Even whether your phone is within your line of sight or not. Our brains are constantly reacting to all of these signals without us even noticing. And when I started treating my room like an operating system for my mind, instead of just a place to live, everything began to change. I started creating separate spaces for different mental states. One place only for deep work, one place for rest, one place for reading, one place for relaxing without screens. It sounds a little extreme at first, but the interesting thing is that the brain learns incredibly fast. After a while, simply sitting in that specific spot automatically puts me into a much deeper state of focus. It's similar to how we naturally feel sleepy the moment we lie down in bed. The brain is constantly associating spaces with behaviors. And if we learn how to use that to our advantage, life becomes far less mentally exhausting. I think this is also why so many people feel drained even when they aren't doing physically difficult work. It's not because they lack time. It's because their minds are never truly allowed to rest from constant stimulation. Phones, notifications, short videos, news, emails, noise, the pressure to constantly respond. Our brains barely have any empty space left anymore. And then we try to fix it by downloading more productivity apps, creating more to-do lists, or using more Pomodoro timers. When the very first thing that might need to change is actually the environment we live in every day. I think one of the most freeing feelings in life is when your actions no longer depend entirely on motivation. You don't need to wake up feeling motivated just to exercise. You don't need to fight an internal battle every time you want to focus. You don't need to waste huge amounts of mental energy just to begin a small task, because your environment is already quietly pulling you in the right direction. And maybe that's the most sustainable form of discipline. Not forcing yourself to live rigidly, but building a life where good behaviors become easier every single day. I think real productivity was never about cramming more tasks into a single day. It's about protecting enough mental energy for the things that truly matter, for deep work, for creativity, for family, for meaningful conversations, for the moments where we are actually present in our own lives. And maybe the first step isn't trying to completely change yourself overnight. Maybe it's simply going back to your room tonight and asking yourself, is my current environment helping me become the person I want to be? Or is it quietly pulling me further away from that person?